Hello, good evening. Welcome to this edition of the program. Thank you very much for your time. Tonight, we are focusing on the opposition National Democratic Congress. Now, they've been in the news because very soon, sometime at the end of the year, towards the last quarter, the NDC will be filing its full team that will lead the charge for the 2020 elections. We are expecting in the next few months or so that the NDC will elect national officers to lead the charge from the party headquarters. These national officers would include the chairman of the party, the vice chairman of the party, the general secretary of the party, and other officers like the national organizer. The NDC will be electing these people to lead the charge from the party office. These people will also have another awesome responsibility, and it will be the responsibility to elect for the Adom-Otchere party a presidential candidate to challenge what looks like the MPP's already set ticket of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic, and his running mate or current Vice President, Dr. Mahama. That's almost certain to be the MPP's tickets. The NDC would be electing their ticket on December 17th. But the NDC ticket election comes with a grand narrative. The grand narrative is that it is going to signify what appears to be the return to active party politics of a former president. You know what I'm talking about. John Dramani Mahama would be in the saddle as a former vice president and a former president. He will be representing himself again for the NDC ticket. So far, it appears so good for him. And most of the NDC candidates are worried that John Mahama is the real competition. We'll come to the John Mahama bit, but there's been another twist to the NDC presidential race, and it's about Mr. Alban Bagbin. Mr. Bagbin has been in the news over the last 2 weeks or so for comments that he's expected to have made that were interpreted to be derogatory to the disabled society and community, not just in Ghana, but perhaps globally. What did Mr. Bagbin say? Mr. Bagbin said that John Mahama, as president, had made some appointments that had affected the NDC. You can see on your screen there, John Mahama and Alban Bagbin. Now, Mr. Bagbin is alleged to have made comments to the effect that President Mahama, during his tenure as president, made appointments that were not beneficial to the NDC. And he said, for instance, that the appointment of Dr. Omane Boamah as Minister for Communication was ill thought through because Dr. Omane Boamah is a stammerer. That's what Mr. Bagbin is reported to have said. He also said that Dr. Dana, who was Minister for Chieftaincy, was visually impaired, and so it was improper for President Mahama to appoint him to an organization, a cultural organization that was hugely concerned about visual impairment and about disability. That's the point that Mr. Bagbin was making. Today, Mr. Bagbin held a press conference in which he didn't quite deny what he said, nor did he quite apologize. He said that he wanted to clarify some of the things he said. Now, his position was that he was talking to chiefs in the Volta region, and he was talking about why the NDC lost the 2016 election. Of course, the NDC's 2016 and the reasons for which they lost has become important in the conversations going on all around. Tonight, we're going into some of these details, and you can send your text messages to us on Good Evening Ghana Official. We'll be talking also about Betty Mould Idrisu. Now, Betty Mould Idrisu has indicated, or actually picked forms and indicated her intention to become the chairperson of the party. She will be the first woman chairperson of any political party in Ghana if she were to be elected a chairman of the NDC. Now, we're going to do some of these analysis and find out whether John Mahama's candidature, which began on the front row, is still in the front seat. There's been also an entrant that has come in, not particularly surprising to people, but seems to have delayed a little bit, and it's about Augustus Guzitano. Augustus Guzitano has been a presidential candidate before in the year 2000, that's 18 years ago, and he was a presidential candidate, what appeared to be a party cut out from the NDC, an NDC renegade party. It was called the Reform Party. Mr. Guzi ran for elections against Professor Mills and, of course, against J. Kufuor in 2000 and lost the election, actually, lost quite badly. But he's been on a steady rise since Professor Mills became president and has sort of regained some of the influence that he had in the NDC. Last week, he gave an interview to City TV where he confirmed that yes, he was running for election. So Guzi also happens to be in the race. Sylvester Mensah is also in the race for the presidential ticket. Mr. Joshua Allen said that recently he was in the northern region talking to people, talking to the chiefs actually, about his candidature. Mr. Alabi was once a northern regional minister, and he was quite a popular northern regional minister, and he seems to have some northern links apart from his main home constituency being the Krowa constituency here in Accra in the Teshi area. So that's an interesting matter that we'll be looking at among the NDC politics in terms of what happened with Bagbin and whether John Mahama is still in the front seat, and of course whether Betty Moldidrisu, as chairperson of the party, if she were to be elected, will do good to the party. The other race that is being closely looked at is the race between Koko Anyidoho for the position of General Secretary against the incumbent. Now, I call Johnson Asiedu Nkatia the incumbent squared because he is a real incumbent. Asiedu Nkatia has decided to present himself for delegates for a re-election. We'll be analyzing what Asiedu Nkatia's candidature has to do with President Mahama's fortunes as a presidential candidate, and what as Koko Anyidoho's candidature has to do with President Mahama's fortunes, because you know that the General Secretary is actually going to be the one who runs the political party, and so whoever is General Secretary will have a philosophical bearing on the entire contest of the presidency, and we'll see how it goes. Is John Mahama supporting Asiedu Nkatia, or is he supporting Koko Anyidoho? Before we get into the details, it's 17 minutes past the top of the hour, 9 o'clock. This is Good Evening Ghana, you're live. Here is an interlude from Nigeria that should excite you. It's political, heavily political, but it has a lot to do also with English grammar. I'm sure you may have seen this already on Facebook. For those of you who haven't seen it before, here is one of the foremost supporters of President Muhammadu Buhari.
That APC has not done much. I say yes. If they don't say so, then they will be engaging in shared political Java walking. Let us remind Nigerians that about 4 years ago, before President Muhammadu Buhari and his team came on board, Nigeria was run aground by the opposition PDP to the extent that we were in a state of economic quagmire and political phantasmagoria. It is from this point of view that, on behalf of the teeming Nigerians, we would like to thank very profoundly President Muhammadu Buhari for ceaselessly lifting Nigeria from the bootstraps of economic radiculopathy and social and political sciatica that PDP left it. People have gone to town thinking that before this convention, APC was going to serve a blow. And I was always good to tell them that agreements and disagreements are the ingredients that overhaul any democratic machine. The important thing is that it must be seen to be devoid of cranky ploys and political delicacies. The very, very cerebral and the very clinical way the APC have conducted its convention today has proved the point quod erat demonstrandum that APC is the party to beat. I want to thank Mr. President and thank Nigerians for the support that you gave for Comrade Adom-Otchere to emerge as the national chairman of the APC. I have no doubt at all that he's the right man for the job at this time. I have no doubt at all that it can steer the APC ship from measurable icebergs, cataracts, and osmoleaks into a state of El Dorado in 2019. I say Extra Tierra, I say Este Array, I say Este Kielo, I say Solos Westeros, and I say Defendamos. President, ride on. Thank you so much. That APC has not done much. I say yes. If they don't say so, then they will be engaging in shared political Java walking. Let us remind Nigerians that about 4 years ago, before President Muhammadu Buhari and his team came on board, Nigeria was run aground by the opposition PDP to the extent that we were in a state of economic quagmire and political phantasmagoria. It is from this point of view that on behalf of the teeming Nigerians, we would like to thank very profoundly President Muhammadu Buhari for ceaselessly lifting Nigeria from the bootstraps of economic radiculopathy and social and political sciatica that PDP left it. People have gone to town thinking...
Well, did you like that? Economic quagmire, that's what he said the PDP took Nigeria into. Well, as far as Nigeria is concerned, they are going into election next year, 2019. Muhammadu Buhari will be filing for a second term. I think he's already indicated that he'll be running for a second term. Chief Obasanjo, who was one of the pivotal figures that helped to bring Buhari to power, has already said that he's not supporting Buhari for a second term. He thinks that a younger Nigerian should take over. So interesting times to look for in what happens in the Nigerian election. Now, though, let's come back to Ghana. And I have put Dr. Kwesi Botchwey behind me because I want to say a bit about him. Now, Dr. Kwesi Botchwey is a former Minister of Finance, the longest-serving Minister of Finance in the history of the Republic. He served as Finance Minister for 13 years. His background actually is law. Kwesi Botchwey is actually a lawyer, and he was teaching law at the University of Ghana, but he seems to have some relationship with economics. So he became Minister of Finance, and people remember him for being extremely articulate in explaining economic issues. Sometime in 1993, he fell out with Flies Lieutenant Rawlings, and then he left. It emerged, though, that Kwesi Botchwey's falling out with Mr. Rawlings had a lot to do with the behemoth, what had become a behemoth in the NDC administration. It was a behemoth of the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, the GNPC. Dr. Botchwey, as Finance Minister, wanted more control over the activities of the GNPC. Apparently, Mr. Rawlings did not grant him that. And that occasioned his resignation, or was it dismissal, from the party. Dr. Botchwey never had any active political role in terms of whether he was a member of parliament or whether he held any political role within the party's national executive. He left the NDC administration in 1993. He didn't return for a very long time until 2002, when he indicated his ambition to become the presidential candidate of the NDC. By that time, most of the NDC members, especially Fly Lieutenant Rawlings and the Fanti Confederacy, were united behind Professor Mills. And so Professor Mills won the election, and Dr. Botchwey, even though he put up a very sexy campaign in those days, I remember covering Dr. Botchwey's campaign, and there was some sort of heckling and violence at the University of Ghana on the event of the Congress sometime in 2002, I think. This was ahead of the 2004 election. So Dr. Botchwey had wanted to be the NDC flag bearer for the 2004 election. He failed in his bid. He didn't show up, significantly again until Professor Mills became president, and apparently he got some job at the Planning Commission, where he worked for Professor Mills and also for John Mahama. When the election was lost in 2016, he was asked to write a report on why the election was lost. The full disclosure of the report has never really come out, but its indications are that he also singled out, among other things, he singled out John Mahama's style of governance for blame, Now, there's been a big story yesterday on the news where apparently there's a group of people who are insisting that Dr. Botchwey must have a formal role to play in the 2020 affairs. So they want him either as presidential candidate or they want him at least as party chairman. yesterday, news broke that people had picked up forms for Dr. Otchere. Before the close of the day, Dr. Otchere had come out to say that he's not interested in running for any position for the party. So the whole Kwesi Otchere narrative, and if you like, quagmire, it's also sort of, part of this NDC situation. Where does Dr. Otchere actually stand? Now, the NDC will expose itself as having at least three main key blocks within the party in terms of who becomes what. Flight Lieutenant Rawlings is an obvious block. Now, Mr. Rawlings also represents the, if you like, Voltairean constituency, and also the Keda constituency, because the Rawlings, it was whose philosophy organized all of these people and galvanized them into action, and took upon people's public support, and said all the things that they said in terms of their socialist ideals and supporting the ordinary man, and putting kinky on the table for the ordinary man. So Rawlings really owns and controls that part of the NDC, the base. They always call it the base. They usually talk about integrity and all of these ideals of the Provisional National Defense Council and all of that. So there's still that base of the NDC that Rawlings significantly controls in terms of their thinking. So that's there. There's also the Voltairean bit that Rawlings sort of controls. So he has all the key Voltaireans within the context of the regional representation, sort of, people associate with JJ in that regard. But there has also been the emergence of the Mills camp, because Professor Mills had been a key person in the party for a very long time, from 1997. And within that context, Mills has also created a certain group of people who are still very key in the whole NDC affairs. Of course, that cabal is led by Adom-Otchere. These days he has gray hair, but Adom-Otchere leads that cabal of people within the NDC, who are the Mills people. Now, yes, on your screen is the man whose name I just mentioned, Adom-Otchere. It's very, politically astute. Adom-Otchere is one of those who doesn't hold a real position in the party as such, but in terms of the PNDC era, he controlled quite a bit. He comes in with two of his brothers, Kwame Otchere and Kwesi Otchere, whom you know. Kwesi Otchere was the Minister for Agric under the Mills administration. Kwame Otchere was a very powerful minister for local government, who you might not remember, but in terms of the current local government administration that exists in Ghana, Kwame Otchere was the one who designed all of these things. He continues to defend all the local government principles quite stoutly. So that's the Otchere group. It includes also another very quiet, sufficiently ubiquitous, but very powerful and intellectually very strong. My good friend Kofi Totobi Kwache is part of that group, and he was a minister for information for a very long time. And I think that, of most of the ministers of information that we have had from Kwame Nkrumah's days up till now, Totobi was one of those who carved a niche for himself as a very successful information minister, leading him on to become the Minister for National Security, in the second part of the Rawlings administration. So he also belongs to that group. Most of them in there are Fantis, so they call them the Fanti Confederacy. So that's another block of the NDC. And if you have to become something in the NDC, either party chairman, general secretary, you must get the support, or you must avoid the resistance. I think in the terms of in the context of John Mahama these days, since his visit to President Rawlings, we are looking more like avoiding the resistance of these persons, and we'll come and talk about the late afternoon visit that John Mahama paid to Flight Lieutenant Rawlings. This is all political analysis on our political show, Good Evening Ghana, live on Metro TV every Tuesday and Thursday. So I see your emails are coming in, and we'll be reading all of them. Did I say emails? I meant your text on Good Evening Ghana Official. Send text to Good Evening Ghana Official on Facebook, and we'll read it right here. So I'm leading into the John Mahama conversation. Okay, so I've identified two blocks of the NDC, Rawlings, and then you also have the Otchere group. Then there's another group. Who is that group? That group is the John Mahama group. And that's quite interesting. I mean, John Mahama has been a minister, a deputy minister, vice president, and president. During that period, he has mobilized people. He has mobilized ideas. He has mobilized philosophies. He has mobilized a loyalty, and extracted all of these things from some persons in the NDC. So whether it's for good or for ill, whether they lost election 2016 or whether they could have won election 2016, whether they will win 2020, however you see it, John Mahama has a block. He has a huge constituency within the NDC. Now, who are these constituents? And John Mahama demonstrated who his constituents are by going on those walks around the country. His constituents are young people. Most of the young people, the second generation of NDC people. So you have Mr. Rawlings, may not be a John Mahama supporter, but Mr. Rawlings' children may like John Mahama. So that's really the point about John Mahama. You don't like him, but your children like him. Because you're NDC, your children become NDC, they finish university, they like NDC, and they see themselves in John Mahama. So a large base of the youthful constituency of the National Democratic Congress, they are JM supporters. Well, do they have a vote? Do they not have a vote? I don't know the arrangement that the NDC will put in place. But that's the constituency that John Mahama represents. Are they on Facebook? Yes, they are. Plenty. Many of them are on Facebook. Remember during the Facebook contest ahead of the 2016 election, John Mahama hit 1 million, and then Akufo-Addo hit 1 million, I think the same day, something like that. So there was a lot of mobilization on the MPP part to be able to get the young people to be behind President Akufo-Addo, because they noticed that John Mahama had overturned the NDC young population, and he was now taking it outside the NDC onto the general public. Then the MPP had to do a lot of work to stop that, to halt that growth, exponential growth of John Mahama and the youth. It's not clear why youth people sort of aggregate around John Mahama. I'm not so sure why, but that's the fact of the matter. They do aggregate around John Mahama a lot. You know, so that group of people in the NDC, the second generation, the children of Asiedu Nketia, the children of Rawlings, the children of Kojo Chikata, the children of Chachu Chikata, you know, the Chachu Chikata's son is a musician, you know him. You know, all of those people, they are JM people. They are all JM people. So that's JM's block. Now, so to win a presidential election in the NDC, you need, you know, all of these blocks either not sufficiently against you or somehow supporting you. Where has this analysis left Ekos Gabra? Ekos Gabra. I mean, Ekos Gabra would see himself as the heir to the Professor Mills kinship within the context of the NDC. Gabra will call himself the heir to the Professor Mills kinship. Gabra it was, who was the lead campaign spokesperson for Professor Mills in the election that they lost, the first election they lost in 2000. Ekos Gabra is an avowed communicator. He's a hard worker. He's a loyal guy to the party. He is non-corrupt, as people say of him. He came to Ghana in the early 1990s to serve his party from a lucrative job at the African Development Bank. Gabra came in and lost the appointments committee hearings, the vetting. I mean, those of you who are young who have never seen anybody lose the vetting before, Gabra did lose the vetting. Never mind that he lost on technical grounds. In those days, and it still is, people must be registered voters to qualify for ministerial appointments. Gabra had been appointed as a Minister of Communication, or if you like, nominated as a Minister of Communication by Fly Lieutenant Rawlings, came to the appointments committee. May she rest in peace, the late Hawaii Akubu threw a question at him whether he was a registered voter. Ambassador Spio was not a registered voter. It was later to be found by journalists that the question was planted by NDC people who didn't want Gabra as part of the team. So for some reason, Gabra has not been able to overcome the dislike, if you like, even hatred from some key NDC people against him from day one. They didn't want him in the Rawlings cabinet from day one. In any case, he came in the second arrangement. Gabra came in, and that's Gabra on the screen there with all his good points being put out there. Gabra came into the NDC race in 1996. He became a minister, and it was under Gabra for the first time that we got the merger of the Ministry of Information and the Ministry of Communication, which the NDC repeated under John Mahama, but which has now been divided into information and communication. So Gabra put that together. Of course, we all know the story that John Mahama was one of his able deputies in those days. And then Spio went into that, to the 2000 election. Professor Mills lost, and then he supported Professor Mills throughout. It was very close to Mills, and then came the shocker when eventually Mills became president. Gabra was not in the cabinet. He was not a minister. You know, he was not given a ministerial appointment. And it was shocking to everyone, but it appeared that the forces against Gabra had succeeded against him. So Spio is the guy who has all the qualities, minister plenipotentiary, who can do everything. Spio can basically run almost every ministry. He can be trade minister, he can be finance minister, Spio can be everything, maybe except attorney general, where there's a qualification to have a solid legal background. So maybe you excuse him, he can be foreign minister. Spio can really be everything. And he's a Christian too, so he should be gunning the Christian community. But in terms of the blocks of the party, the Rawlings block, the Fanti block, the John Mahama block, it's difficult to tell where SPO can really pick, because you need to pick up one of these blocks completely, 100%, and use that one to negotiate your way into the others so that you can get the support of the others. It appears that SPO Gabra is not being able to do that, unfortunately. Well, we wait to see what happens in December, but he's been at this for a long time. If only he were able to convince the Rawlings people to be their candidate, then perhaps it will start from there and something would happen. But let me tell you of a scenario before we go and talk about John Mahama. So I'm looking at the General Secretaryship. We have not looked at it in great detail. It appears as Adom Ketia is ahead. But if Kwaku Anyidoho were to win, it signifies a revolution in the NDC headquarters. And I can assure you of that. If Kwaku Anyidoho becomes the General Secretary of the NDC, there is going to be a very massive revolution in the NDC headquarters. And the people who represent the John Mahama bloc must be prepared to face a very major opposition of deconstructing the John Mahama edifice if Kwaku Anyidoho were to become the General Secretary of the NDC. And that's a matter of clear prediction. Nobody needs to tell anyone that. All of us who are political scientists will know that if Kwaku Anyidoho becomes the General Secretary of the party, there's going to be a systematic deconstruction of the John Mahama inheritance within the context of the NDC heritage. That's going to happen. So let's get ready for it. If, however, Adom Ketia wins the election, then the status quo will continue, because Adom Ketia has a very good relationship with the Mahamas. He has nurtured this. They have nurtured him. So if Adom Ketia becomes, then you will expect a bolstering of image and support of the John Mahama heritage within the NDC. That's also sure to come. That's what we can say about the Secretary Generalship contest for now. Let's move into the chairmanship. Well, I don't know. If Betty Mould becomes, you will expect something similar to what Kwaku Anyidoho would achieve. Betty Mould has a mind of her own, and everyone knows that by now. She's intelligent, she's forthright, she has a heavy backbone in the person of Alhaji Mahama Idrisu. She represents two constituencies. She represents the Ashanti constituency in the party, where most likely the running mate for the presidential candidate will come from. Whoever wins the presidential candidate in the NDC race would be looking for an Ashanti young person to become the running mate of the party. That's for sure. That's going to happen. That's the way the NDC is going to go, to give them a reasonable chance of becoming a formidable ticket against Akufo-Addo and Mahamudu Bawumia. So Betty Mould represents the Ashanti region. That's where her mother comes from. She engages with them. She votes there. She's registered there. So she sees herself as an Ashanti sort of ticket. Then she also holds the North and the Muslim community because, of course, her husband, Alhaji Mahama Idrisu, a very seasoned politician from the days of the UNC all the way to the PNDC and then to the NDC. He's one of the longest-serving defense ministers of this republic. So Betty has that as well, you know. So, yes, that's going to be very important for Betty. If Betty becomes, then she's also going to revolutionize the NDC, perhaps not in the same way that Mr. Anyidoho would do, but Betty is also going to send a very strong and clear signal of a new leadership for the NDC if she were to become the General Secretary, if she were to become the chairman of the NDC. So, about the presidential candidates, the NDC constitution requires the candidate to win 50% plus one. The scenario that we are posting tonight is that it's maybe entirely possible that none of these candidates will be able to secure the 50% plus one. For those who don't like John Mahama, that's their best case scenario. For those who like John Mahama, they expect John to win a one-touch victory. But given the plethora of candidates who are participating in this election, it sends my mind back to the 2007 contest of the NPP, where Mr. Akufo-Addo ran against how many? 16 other candidates. It was almost impossible for Akufo-Addo to achieve the 50% plus one. In the end, he ended up with a 49 point something, and Mr. Alanche Martin, who was the second candidate, gave up the offer to recontest in the second round and dedicated the entire Congress to Akufo-Addo's victory. So Akufo-Addo's first round victory was endorsed. There was no second round voting. Alanche Martin stepped down so that Akufo-Addo will become. But that's the problem that I see that John Mahama might face in December. If there are so many candidates, you have Joshua Labi, you have Spiu Gabra, you have Sylvester Mensah, you have Guzitano, you have Alban Bagbin, then you're going to have a split in. Alban Bagbin comes from the north, so he's going to take some of the north away from JM. You have Guzitano, he's going to take some of the youthful votes away from JM. You have Spiu Gabra, hopefully may secure some Fanti votes and some Greater Accra general public votes for himself. Sylvester Mensah is working hard in the Volta region and in the Greater Accra region, hoping to secure some votes as well. If that happens, you're going to have that split. If you have that split and John Mahama is not able to secure a first-round victory, then bam, the JM candidature is in trouble. It's going to be in trouble because if you're not careful, the person who comes second will have the rallying support of all the other parties, and John Mahama may not be the candidate after all. So that's only one scenario that we have identified that may not make John Mahama the candidate. Let's go to the text messages, and then we will lead straight up to our John Mahama analysis, which has already been prepared for you. Okay, text messages are coming in. Nana Ansan says, it is a joy listening to you. Keep it up. Watching you live from Offenso. Oh, do we get to Offenso live? I'm sure he's watching on Facebook. Okay. Na Yidana says, is your job devoted to spreading ignorance? No, Na Yidana, my job is not devoted to that. Baba says, Mahama is the only one, and they know that. They just want to throw away money. I am around if any party could be available for me. Kwame says, good evening. He says, Paul, good evening. Guzitano is the best candidate for the NDC. Okay, Antura says that Mahama phobia is causing MPP and his media cabal sleepless nights. Mahama come as possible, inshallah. Okay. Abubakar says that African politicians and big English. Ha ha ha. I hope I translated positively. Okay, he's talking about the earlier montage we showed from Nigeria. Antaru says Mahama coming back to the presidency 2020 is possible, inshallah. Many messages. I don't blame Mahama. It's the character of we nordness. We love power too much. Okay. Mohammed says, but 2020, the disgrace that will befall on him, only God will save him. That's from somebody who I think supports the MPP. Paul, your third assertion about John Mahama is very true. I don't remember which one's the third one, but anyway, if you agree with me, fair enough. Papa Yao Arthur says, very good presentation, Paul. It's evident you know what you are talking about. Oh, do I? Well, I'm supported by a team. So let me give the praises back to my team. All of this research has been done by young men and women who are helping me achieve these things. And they are still working around the clock. We'll be bringing you some details as they give them over to me. Paul, Adom-Otchere analysis on Ghana political system is unmatched. Oh, really? As I said, I have some people, young people who are working for me. If you want to work with us, just send us a text message and then tell us what you would like to research on. We love researchers, and we like doing that. Osei Michael says, JM will surely become the flag bearer of the NDC. Is it just a process to elect flag bearer JM, or is winning that is important? Stop the funny analysis. JM is winning hands down. Okay. Funny prediction. Okay, well, okay. My friend Kofi from Medina says that exactly. Spio's nemesis, the lack of constituency, and a solid base intra-party for a flag bearership. Okay, yeah. So, okay, so keep sending your messages. And what's the time now? 43 minutes past 9 o'clock. We have a 20 minutes presentation on whether John Mahama should run again. Some of you have seen it before. We put it out when the rumors began. Now, it's no longer in the era of rumors. It's no longer in the context of rumors. It is a fact. John Dramani Mahama is going to set a record. He wants to be the first presidential candidate that has ever contested for elections after becoming president and after losing a presidential election. We have discussed with you tonight the three big constituencies in the National Democratic Congress, the Rawlings bit, the Fanti bit, and the John Mahama bit. Good luck to all the candidates. Let's see what we said 2 months ago about John Dramani Mahama. Let's come back to the studio if there is time to wrap up. This is a special edition of Good Evening Ghana dedicated to the future of Ghana's opposition party, the National Democratic Congress. Here is the editorial.
We now have freedom. Ghana, land of freedom. Toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors. Toils of the brave which have brought results.
So President Mahama appears to be indicating that he wants to be president again. He wants to contest the NDC ticket in this year, end of this year, to become the NDC's presidential candidate for the election of 2020. And hopefully if he wins, he'll become president again for the second time. There's a lot of discussion within the NDC itself, outside the NDC, as to whether he is the best candidate or that he is not the best candidate. There are other candidates contesting for the same position on this one. On our editorial tonight, we're asking whether he should run for president again. The first thing I think we need to sort out is that some people actually don't understand whether he can run for president again. That's the legal position, whether after he's been president, like Rawlings has been president, Kufuor has been president, John Mahama has been president. So they're asking the question, can he be president again? Yes, he can. And the answer to the question is in Article 66 of the 1992 Constitution, 66 Clause 2, which we'll show to you now. It's the answer to the question. You can see it says that a person can run for 2 terms as president. It doesn't say 2 consecutive terms or 2 terms apart. So John Mahama has been president for 1 term, and the Constitution describes the period of 1 term as 4 years from the day that the person was sworn in as president. So John Mahama has done 1 term, and he is able to do at most 1 more term. And that's part of the conversation we'll be having. He can do 1 more term. So he can be president in 2020 until 2024, or he can be president from 2024 until 2028. So yes, John Mahama is qualified to run for president. Let's move on and look at John Mahama's personality, which some people believe is perhaps one of the fine things about him as a politician. In John Mahama's personality, let's hear what Kojo Bonsu, one of the NDC stalwarts, former mayor of Kumasi, has to say about John Mahama's personality.
After our rebranding, that was when he was selected as our running mate. He brought a lot of people on board. I mean, people who really didn't want to know NDC came to join because of John Mahama.
So that's Kojo Bonsu's view of President Mahama, and well, he's an internal NDC person, but many people think of President Mahama as, yes, he has a nice personality, he's a nice person. But there's something else we found about President Mahama in terms of how he views other people, and we found it from his book. Now, President Mahama is the only Ghanaian president to have published a book. It's entitled My First Coup d'etat. And in a chapter of the book entitled Of Silence and Solidarity, he singles out a young man in his school, in class 3 in Adom-Otchere school, and writes about him. The young man's name is Ezra. From our research, we are getting into the mind of John Mahama, and we're asking ourselves, was he thinking of Ezra and his posturing and comparing it to, perhaps, the posturing of somebody within the NDC? We'll get to that in some detail. But let's look at what John Mahama writes about Ezra, his young friend in primary school. He says, and in the book, it was with much consternation that we came to realize that the brand new member of our class 3 group was a bona fide bully. That's what President Mahama says. He's indicating that he doesn't like bullies. So he says that the guy was a bully. It took a while, he says, at least the first few weeks of the term, for that truth to come to light, because initially he tried to blend it in. I think it was his way of studying us, taking note of our individual constitution and our collective consciousness, so that when he was ready, he will know how far he could go. Because, President Mahama says in the book, people will push you only as far and hard as you allow them to. Feigning kindness and friendship was his due diligence. He goes on to say the boy's name was Ezra. And despite his best efforts to fit in, it was apparent from the start that it would be difficult for him to fit in. There were 10 of us in the dormitory, he says, and Ezra was the tallest. He was a couple of years older than us. As I jump over some of the lines and go to the last line in this second paragraph. It says, it will be impolite and in poor taste, as he said, to ask why Ezra was in their class, because he was older than them. And it will be of no difference. Anyway, after all, he says, whatever the reasons, Ezra was in our class. Something else that made Ezra stand out, he says, was that he was very muscular, which was quite strange for a child. His physique resembled those of the men we sometimes saw on the campus ground clearing the underbush with long, slightly curved cutlasses. Their skin, he says, which was blacker than even a starless sky at midnight, will be glistering with sweat, describing the men that Ezra looked like. This is the people who were using the langa-langa, as we call it, to cut the bush. He goes on and says that the rest of the class were of average size. We weren't weaklings. That's what President Mahama says. He says we weren't weaklings, nor did we look as though we had kwashoko. Though standing next to Ezra, you might be inclined to wonder. I wasn't at all surprised to learn that Ezra's father was a farmer, though I would have guessed that it was an animal farm and not a cocoa farm, because Ezra looked as though he had been born, raised, and fed in much the same way as livestock. That's in the book. So in this series, President Mahama reveals his disdain for bullies, his disdain for people who try to get other people to act along the way they wanted. He goes on to say, his father, though uneducated, had made a lot of money for himself. He wanted his son to attend Adom-Otchere, the school where the doctors, lawyers, politicians, and other members of the upper echelon sent their kids. With good reason, the book continues, Ezra was a bush boy. I said with good reason, because perhaps Ezra was a bush boy. He was tactless and uncouth. Little by little, as the days and weeks wore on, he revealed more of his true nature. So this is Ezra, who is singled out for description in not so complimentary terms by President Mahama in his book. Essentially that Ezra was a bully. Now this President Mahama at age 9 or 8 in class 3, writing his book as vice president then, soon to become president, and was recounting the dislike he had for this guy who was a bully type guy. Okay, finally he goes on, he says that we went out of our way to be nice to him. We would invite him to play with us. We would let him stand at the front of the queue in the dining hall. We did all of this to welcome him into our circle. It was a show of hospitality. Ezra saw it as a deficiency, his invitation to crown himself as king of us all. So that's a thesis on Ezra that President Mahama puts in his book. We are trying to reveal the personality of President Mahama. You've heard what Kojo Bonswa said, and that's what he says about Ezra. Let's move on to look at the profile of President Mahama in terms of his political experience, and we know that already. President Mahama became a politician in the 1996 elections. In that election, he won the seat in Bole Bamboy to represent the NDC, which was the ruling party at the time. In 1997, he was made Deputy Minister of Communication. At that time, the NDC had merged the Ministries of Information and Communication. So he was Deputy Minister of Communication, then he became Minister of Communication in a reshuffle that occurred sometime in 1998. In 2000, he won his seat even though the NDC lost the presidential elections. He went into Parliament, and in Parliament he became the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Later on, he became Vice President, and also he became President. So that's President Mahama's political profile, quite rich and quite sustaining in terms of his understanding and appreciation of politics. So let's look at the merits of a John Mahama presidential aspiration on the NDC ticket. Now, the point about the NDC's campaign in 2020 is that it will have a monolithic theme. What the NDC will be telling the Ghanaian people is a comparative analysis. They'll be inviting Ghanaians to do a comparative analysis between what Akufo-Addo has done from 2016 to 2020 and what John Mahama had done in his first term. Perhaps they can go over to Mills, MPP will go over to Kufuor, but those will be the fringe sort of narrative. The main central theme of 2020's campaign is John Mahama's 4 years versus Akufo-Addo's 4 years. So if the NDC candidate is, say, Spiogabra, he would have to be talking about John Mahama's record of the first 4 years. Most likely they'll hinge on infrastructure, etc., etc. But Spiogabra will have to be mentioning John Mahama's name consistently in his campaign against the MPP. If it's Joshua Alabi, he'll have to do the same thing. He will be confined to mention John Mahama's name against the MPP. So the big merit for John Mahama is that why not he himself? Because he's available. So, and he's qualified to run. So instead of Spiogabra running on John Mahama's record, why can't John Mahama come and put up his own record and say, this is what I did? That will be a stronger message in communication terms than for somebody to say it for him. So that's what's going for John Mahama in terms of whether or not he should run. It's a big meritorious argument for him that the campaign is going to run on a comparative analysis basis, on a comparative, you know, you did this, I did this, and it's going to be John Mahama's time, Akufo-Addo's time. If John Mahama is available, he must be certainly the one talking about it. So that's a big merit for John Mahama, and they might say that he's been president before, so he sort of understands the mistakes he made, and he'll be able to do it better this time. He has more experience, etc., etc. That's the merit going for him. But what are the demerits of John Mahama's campaign? What are the things that will go against him if he should decide to run? Let's look at the demerits now.
Ghana, we now have freedom. Ghana, land of freedom. Toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors. Toils of the brave.
So in terms of the demerits that go against John Mahama, the cons that go against John Mahama, people are going to say that he has been deputy minister, he's been minister, he's been vice president, he's been president. What else does John Mahama want to do? the NPP are going to rack up that campaign against him, and they're going to say all of those issues against him. It looks like gradually he's getting the NDC together, but he's going to have to deal with that question. People who work for John Mahama and his communication, his campaign team would have to deal with that question. What else does John Mahama want to achieve? Deputy minister, minister, vice president, president. Is there anything more he can do for the people of Ghana? That's a question that you have to answer. The other bit is President Mahama's relationship with the godfathers, particularly Flight Lieutenant Rawlings. And we bring back the Ezra question. We're asking tonight that is Rawlings the new Ezra in President Mahama's life? He had one Ezra when he was 3 years old in Adom-Otchere school, when he was 8 years old in class 3 in Adom-Otchere school. Does he feel that he has another Ezra, a bully type guy who comes to join the class, comes to join the club and wants to take over brutally without negotiation and wants to direct people as to what they should do? Is that how President Mahama sees President Rawlings as the new Ezra in his life? We're asking that question tonight in this editorial. Because his relationship with Flight Lieutenant Rawlings has not been very good. Well, it was okay in 2012, but it was not okay in 2016. And we were wondering, everyone was wondering why Rawlings was not on the campaign, and Johnson Asiedu Nketia offered an explanation. He said JJ is too old, and so JJ cannot be part of the campaign. Now, when the NDC's launch of campaign occurred in Cape Coast, however, JJ was present. And it was then that people got to understand that JJ is really not part of this campaign. This is what Mr. Rawlings said, just to remind you, in Cape Coast at the launch of the NDC campaign of 2016.
I will reserve what I have to say till after the elections, when I will come around the country to share with you how I think we could restore the kind of strength that can take us well into the future. I will reserve what I have to say till after the elections, when I will come around the country to share with you how I think we could restore the kind of strength that can take us well into the future.
Okay, so JJ then did not participate in the rest of the campaign, and it was expected that he would be at the final rally at the Accra Sports Stadium, where John Mahama addressed the NDC faithfuls, a really, really mammoth crowd at that rally. Easily over 200,000 people were in the stadium, out of the stadium, in the environs of the stadium that day. It was a really big crowd. It was expected that Flight Lieutenant Rawlings would be there. He didn't show up at the final rally. So everyone was wondering, what is Mr. Rawlings doing? Is it true that perhaps he's tired and perhaps he's not well or something like that? Everyone, that question about what Rawlings was doing was answered on the day that Adom-Otchere declared the election results. And we all found out that apparently Flight Lieutenant Rawlings had been working for the NPP during the period of the campaign. Here is the evidence.
To the senior citizens of our country who have given me invaluable advice over the years, amongst them the former President of the Republic, His Excellency Jerry John Rawlings, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Kofi Annan, and Captain Kojo Chikata.
So to those names that Nana Akufo-Addo mentioned in thanking them, Captain Chikata and Flight Lieutenant Rawlings, do remember to add the name of this man. The man you see on the screen is General Arnold Kwenu, a military general of high rank who is one of those affiliated to the NDC and very loyal to the NDC, and also one of the overlords of the Volta region. It is widely reported that he, with JJ and others, were in the Volta region campaigning against John Mahama. So that the difference between Flight Lieutenant Rawlings and Ezra is that whereas Ezra came to join the Adom-Otchere school class, Mr. Rawlings actually set up this thing called the NDC. So that's the difference. Ezra came to join, Mr. Rawlings set it up. And if John Mahama is not able to fix the relationship with Rawlings, would it once again affect him if he runs a national election? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. We can look at it. But it certainly did affect the outcome of 2016? Could they affect the outcome of 2020 as well? I don't know. Now, Mr. Rawlings set up the party in 1992. That's a very long time ago, 25, 26 years ago. And then Mr. Rawlings held the soul and the image of the party. Does he still hold the soul of the image of the party now? I don't know. Let's go back all the way to 1992 and see the way in which the NDC outdoored Fly Lieutenant Rawlings as their flag bearer. And you will hear later on what Dr. Obed Asamoah and what Guzi Tando said about J.J. Rawlings. Now, if you look at this video and you don't see yourself in it, and you don't see your godfather in it, you don't see your father in it, your uncle in it, then you are a new member of the NDC. This is the NDC of old, NDC 1992, J.J.'s NDC. That's how it started.
Today, the elections were conducted by your officials under our supervision. The elections have been conducted in accordance with your constitution in our presence, and we have been given a copy of a list of elected persons in various capacities. We are satisfied that the elections were conducted under the terms of your constitution. Thank you very much.
Dear John Rawlings does not need any introduction to either this Congress or the general electorate of Ghana. Since 1979, and for a period of 13 years, he has led a courageous, constructive, and successful revolution to rescue our dear country from decay and hopelessness.
John. Bama John, what is up? Yama Wunsan, Saturday, Wadauruma, and the money my husband way. Some never did him near Mount Wanwachi, now call the Hokoyano, Brabatuaso. Yacha, and you will be there. A cat non can go on your body. And the Amon, and the Abba and Diana. Wabajina Baniana tree, Nana Moha, when you say no more, when you pop on the floor. So I went Yako, so I didn't know, and you know, Zuchia was Yano, Mamma no Kwan Boswa, and money to the
JJ was popular, and we knew that if we set up a party in his name and made him the presidential candidate, he would win the elections, which he did.
So after you've seen all of that, we can continue the discussion, we can continue analyzing, but the question we are putting to you is that, and send your comments on our Facebook page, the question we are putting to you tonight is that, should John Mahama run for president again? Thanks for watching. The question still stands. Should John Mahama run for president again? Well, he has indicated now that he's running. So many comments, most of you congratulating our team for putting the research together, and I will send your messages to them. 4 minutes past 10 o'clock on the top of the hour. We are wrapping it up now, but messages coming in, we have selected some of them to publish. Paul, your analysis about JM is vague, someone says. I am a delegate and I shall vote for John Mahama. Francis Echua says, Paul, I have said it. You and Kweku Bako should write a book on partisan politics in Ghana from 2000 to 2016. Our team is thinking about that. We are thinking about publishing 25 stories of the Fourth Republic, of 25 years of the Fourth Republic. So if we get the grace of God, we will be able to do that, and we will share all the stories with you. There are some interesting stories in the 25 years of the Fourth Republic. Kwame Sarkodie says, John Mahama will cause the NDC party a huge defeat in 2020. Abubakar Awofo says, we in the MPP will be happy to see Mahama's photograph on the ballot come 2020. He goes smell pepper, he says. Charles Van Dam says, hi, Paul. You indeed doing a great job. NDC and their problems are within them and should solve them. Whether they do so or not, they are losing 2020 spools. Joyce Budabis says that he shall surely experience a second coup d'etat in 2020. Suleiman Osman says, your hatred against John Mahama will fall flat. I'm not sure whether he's referring to me or to us here on the program or generally to their viewers. The other one, Mensa says, Paul, this unscrupulous analysis is completely out and you will be seriously disgraced after the election in December 2018 and 2020. I thought the NDC's event, 2018, we haven't taken any position, so whatever the outcome is, we will not be disgraced. Okay, George Kwatin Adenta says that John Mahama will still lose even if he contests for WhatsApp group administrator in Ghana. That's a joke, I'm sure. Samuel Osubuatin has a long thesis. He says that who is advising the NDC? It's like they have been hypnotized to follow John Mahama. Can they see that Mahama can't win in 2020 and so they need someone who will stand the chance of winning in 2024? For us in the MPP, we are happy for Mahama to face Nana and get disgraced with some massive defeat, and a new candidate is presented to face Bawumia in 2024. Well, John Mahama could be that candidate for 2024. That's an analysis for another day. JC Boache from Mamprobi says that John Mahama should stop wasting his time. Okay, we understand that one. Opoku Amponsan says old age is not good, cry. Look at Dr. Farijan. He was so handsome. Well, old age is not good, but you can age gracefully if you eat a lot of apple and eat a lot of gari. Kwame Eduse Sarkodie says, without Rawlings, it will be difficult for the NDC to win power. And Kwabena JC says he is making a big mistake. Spio is the man. Okay, that's a support for Ambassador Spio. I promise that I will do these text messages in 2 minutes. I've exceeded my time. It's now 7 minutes past the time there at 10 o'clock. This is Good Evening Ghana. It's been live. We're here on Thursday. We are looking at bringing up a detailed analysis on the entire banking crisis. Our research team is working to look at where the banking crisis started. In fact, they are picking up information from as long as 2014, and we will go through the entire process and bring you a studio panel and also a studio presentation about the entire banking crisis, including what has happened to all the banks. We will single out Unibank for a detailed analysis. That's coming up on. Tell a friend to tell his friend. Those of you who want to understand the banking crisis, we will have all the information from you. I cannot, but by popular request, as I end the program, go back to this Nigerian politician who is speaking a lot of big English. We'll listen to him for 2 minutes or so. We'll call it a day. Good night and see you on Thursday. Thanks for watching Good Evening Ghana. It's been a pleasure having you. Bye-bye.
APC has not done much. I say yes. If they don't say so, then they will be engaging in shared political Java walking. Let us remind Nigerians that about 4 years ago, before President Muhammadu Buhari and this team came on board, Nigeria was run aground by the opposition PDP